Welcome to part 2. If you didn't watch part 1, then you're in the wrong place. You fool. If you did, I couldn't think of a better intro, so we're gonna jump straight into it. Moving on from spells designed for combat or for social encounters, we're gonna take a look at utility spells. This category has a pretty vast number of spells, but generally they're designed for the following reasons. The first being aiding travel, either by adding speed, some safety, or some stealth. Things like Pass Without a Trace, Tree Stride, and Fly. Then you have avoiding or defending against the environments, or natural hazards, such as dungeon traps or harsh weather. And of course, spells that bolster clarity or awareness, anything from dark vision to the auto-map filling Commune with Nature. I love that spell. You'll notice that most of the spells in this category can actually work well in other situations, like flying over battle or adding magical stealth in a more social situation. My guess as to why this is because most DMs neglect overworld travel in favor of constant combat or storytelling. But in my opinion, it's fun as hell to toss grappling hooks at everything taller than you and go climbing, or go fishing on a whim. I like variety in my games. I'll make a spell for each subcategory, and try my best to have them be versatile enough to be cast more than once a month. The couple of spells I made in the last video were given some balancing advice, which is actually the golden key to making a quality spell. If you don't have the friends or the time to playtest your stuff, let people online tell you why it's wrong. As of now, I'd change Gaseous Tongues to have a willing creatures affected, and non-willing creatures make some sort of charisma save. Without that, it could cripple an enemy spellcaster for the entirety of combat. As for the contract-altering spell, I'd allow some lesser divination spells to see through the illusion, and bring up Truesight or similar abilities that render the spell useless. Now here are some more spells I'll try to balance. Zone of Travel. This evocation spell strengthens the physical traits inside of a selected area. The spell affects a 20-foot sphere centered on a point you choose within range. While this spell is active, any creature inside the area gains +10 to their movement speed, and their jump distance is doubled. At higher levels, the area affected increases by 15. This spell somewhat combines the effects of Long Strider and Jump, weakens one of them, and affects an area instead of just a single creature. It's great for crossing the most dangerous thing any dungeon has yet to offer, a 10-foot wide pit. The next spell I made is a much higher level, and offers a cluster of small buffs for both mobility and combat. I used both Summon Elementals and Investiture of Stone as mechanical bases. I called it Elemental Symbiosis. You call forth a powerful elemental guardian to protect you. Choose an area of earth, fire, water, or air that fills a 10-foot cube that you can touch. An elemental spirit then springs from the area and fully encases you. The elemental is friendly to you and your companions for the duration and exists to protect you. It gives you a pretty hefty chunk of temporary hit points to add to your pool, which also functions to defend your concentration on the spell itself. It gives you resistance to certain attacks that the elemental themselves would normally be resistant to. Your movement speed rapidly increases, and you can move through your elemental's environment without being harmed. This immediately makes it a lot better than I believe the 5th level spell Investiture of Stone, which allows you to move through stone as if it were air, but you can't end your turn there. I'd like to be able to end my turn there. Also on your turn, the elemental can make some passive attacks. It's a really hefty spell that basically gives you an Iron Man suit. One interesting angle of it is that each unique guardian grants its own type of mobility, as well as immunity to environmental damage. And lastly, we have Screeching Sense, one I actually made a while ago when I realized that bats are the only creatures with echolocation. You emit a high-pitched screech that travels out to 120 feet. At the beginning of your next turn, the sound you released returns in a black and white image of the local layout. This image does not show information behind walls and is blurred around corners beyond 10 feet. Your passive perception for this image is 10 plus your spellcasting modifier. I personally really like it. It's definitely unique compared to the other two I made. But something to keep in mind when creating spells from scratch is that unique does not always mean good. When I was newer to the game, I wanted everything to be by my own design, and it pretty much all either sucked horribly or was about as balanced as a face-down pizza. Another thing most new players to the game tend to neglect are spell components, specifically material. Here's a quick lesson in components. Verbal components are those weird Gregorian or tribal chants wizards do before something explodes. All but 18 spells need vocal vibrations to trigger, and those that don't are heavy on somatics. Somatic components are basically which direction you fling your hands in. A random number of spells don't require gestures, but a quick rule of thumb is as follows. If the spell is designed to command either the forces of nature, a god, or a creature, you have to speak the command. If you have to pick a target or use your motor skills to direct something, you need at least one free hand. The reason most spells require some sort of physical movement that needs your hand is so you don't try to munchkin around with any extra free hands that you have, adding shields and extra attacks where you shouldn't be able to. And finally, our materials. The reason we rarely use them is because a spell focus such as a wand or a rock with a smiley face on it can work in their place, unless the component is consumed, or cost a fat stack of cash, or both. It seems to me that the metagame reason for expensive spells is to force casters to plan ahead. Stuff like Arcane Lock, Clairvoyance, and Identify are extremely helpful if you knew you would need them. So if a spell is incredibly helpful in semi-common situations, and if the solution that this spell offers is very hard to reach without it, make it have a costly component. Otherwise, even though everyone just uses fancy staffs to cast spells, just flavor the components to fit the spell itself. On that note, can someone tell me why invisibility needs an eyelash encased in gum arabic? And why gum arabic? Why does that stand out so much? Now on to saving throws versus attack rolls. This is actually pretty easy to figure out after taking a step back, so let me try to explain. Attack rolls are only made when dealing damage to a target, and only when targeting individual creatures or objects. Saving throws are made by targets for two reasons. The first is when damage you do spreads over an area. Spells like Circle of Death can spread to any number of creatures within a 60-foot sphere, and potentially deal the same damage to all of them. A single attack roll should never determine the outcome of that. The second is avoiding non-damaging, but unwanted effects. For the most part, these effects are going to be conditions, like charms, fears, and knocking them on their asses. But the freedom here goes to you. You can even combine both for a lingering effect, like the existing spell Storm Sphere. The last major aspect of a spell you need to know is durations and concentrations. The duration is a sliding scale that comes in tiers, ranging from instantaneous to potentially forever, or unless some asshole comes along and dispels it. Generally, durations around 1 minute are used to string out damage, hold a negative effect that cripples a target, protect and buff an ally, or keep a spell in a passive-active state until just the right moment. Spells that last 10 minutes are Conjured Hazards, stronger mobility spells, and most forms of Foresight. Spells that run for an hour tend to vary quite a bit more, and depend on the situation that they're designed for. Anything longer than that is meant to be a semi-permanent effect, such as stationary illusions, permanent transformations, strong curses, or high-level charms. Concentration is the thorn in all casters' backs. It's the fucking thing that keeps us from creating 60 constrictor snakes instead of just 8. I'm mad. Really, what this stops is any unwanted synergies between two passive effects, spells the caster could potentially stack and multiply their uses, or it makes conjuration a balanced thing. It also makes True Strike even more of a joke than it already is. But for conjuration, the summoned allies are strong and dominate turn economy, which is why breaking the summoner's concentration should be the enemy's priority. As I've said before, there are countless numbers of variables, and balancing new additions is an almost impossible task. There's a lot you can do to fine-tune your creations, like altering the area of effect to compensate for damage, changing die numbers, etc, etc. But if there's anything I wanted this video to do, it's to inspire you to go and make something cool, hopefully giving you the tools you need to do so. But if you want to make a broken-ass spell that lets you kill a deity or transform a house cat into a Tarrasque, fucking do it. The game's about fun, and if concentration bogs you down, don't use it. Not to say ignore the rules, cause each player is different. If the nitty-gritty is your thing, try to collect and keep track of your spell components, and be careful with your charms. Or if you like hard mode, take True Strike and try to use it. I agree with those of you who said flavoring should have its own video, so that'll be down the line sometime soon. I'll talk about spicing up classes too, and bring up things like tribal bards who grunt and howl with rhythms, or barbarians who use a spectral companion as a substitute for raging. It's a crazy game, and all I really want is you guys to enjoy it. Till next time.